הדובר הבא שלנו הוא דוקטור כריסטופר גזה, הוא כבר בזום, זה הדובר האחרון בזום. כריסטופר הוא יועץ שלנו כבר במשך 3 שנים, הוא בא מחברת היי כריסטופר. I cannot hear you. You have to open your microphone. You are in...
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, Christopher.
Hello, Yossi.
Hi. So I said, Christopher, you will describe what you are doing in Germany. I want to say that you are our friend. You work with our institute for the last 3 years. Actually, I promised Christopher that he must come to Israel. It's a sunny country, nice country. I've been 1 time or 2 times. And in the last 3 years or 2 years, every time that I invite him, then the Corona time in Germany or in Israel, so he didn't come to Israel in the last 2 years. We wanted to be in this presentation in our country, but unfortunately, he will give his presentation from Cologne with the Zoom. Christopher, please.
Yeah, thank you, Yossi. And I promise as soon as I can come, I will be very happy to come to Tel Aviv again. Yeah, I hope you can see my presentation now. I have here a weird view now. Let's see. Screen sharing. So let's start. Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Christoph Gatzen. I'm with Frontier Economics. We are an economic consultancy with offices in Cologne, in Brussels, in Paris, in London, and in Madrid. And we are working in topics around the power industry, the gas industry, also in the automotive industry and the transport industry. Can you still see my screen? Hello? Okay.
Yes, we can see your presentation.
Okay, perfect. And today I would like to give you a brief background what's going on in Europe, because hydrogen is a big topic in Europe. And then very briefly, if we have time, I want to touch a little bit on the Israel, both on the power sector and the gas sector, from a kind of more European view, and from the experience what we have with hydrogen discussions in Europe. And maybe it's something interesting in there for you for also the situation in Israel. Okay, if we start, as you might have noted, Europe has just tightening its greenhouse gas ambitions. So before we wanted to reduce 40% of our CO2 emissions by 2030. Since this year, the target for 2030 has increased to minus 55%. And on the long run, Europe wants to be greenhouse neutral. And this means that we have for 2030 now new targets for renewables. Europe wants to have 39% of its energy coming from renewables by 2030. And this is the whole economy. It's not just the power sector. So this is very ambitious. In the transport sector, we want to have 26% of renewables by 2030 instead of the 14% which we had before. And we also want to improve our energy efficiency. So similar as in Israel, we have energy efficiency plan, and we want to be better when using our energy. All in all, this means that we have to pay more than 1 trillion euros investments in the next decades. So this is a big task and challenge. And what we see is that hydrogen has a big role in that. There is an official hydrogen strategy from the European Commission, but I think, as we have seen also from the speaker before, that there also will be member state strategies in different countries. Each member state has a strategy of its own. And the European strategy says we want to have 40 gigawatts of electrolyzers to be installed in Europe by 2030. Another 40 gigawatts in our neighboring countries. And on the very long run, we want to have hydrogen as a kind of platform technology, which is then used in all sectors. And the vision of the Commission is that by 2050, there will be cumulative investments into green hydrogen only in Europe between about 200 and 500 billion euros. So this is a very big market. And the problem what we have currently is that we have big ambitious plans, but the regulation is not there yet. And a big discussion which is currently ongoing is okay, from a chemical perspective, hydrogen is hydrogen. It's H2. This is easy. But in a regulatory perspective, it's important what source of hydrogen do we accept to be sustainable. And we have the color book of hydrogen currently in the European policy debates. First, the hydrogen which we know, which is the hydrogen which is used currently, is what we call the gray hydrogen. So this is hydrogen made from natural gas, and then you have steam, methane steam reformation, and you have CO2 emissions coming with that. So this is the hydrogen which is currently used in refineries or in steel or in industry in Europe. And then there are a couple of new alternatives. Most famous is the blue hydrogen, where you have steam methane reform with carbon capture and storage, or carbon capture and utilization. This is something, for example, the Norwegians are looking into a lot. Then we have turquoise hydrogen, where you have, again, natural gas as a starting point, but you use pyrolysis. So you get kind of carbon, fixed carbon as an output, and you don't have CO2 emissions. And then there are various forms of electrolysis, which we call either the green hydrogen, if the electricity which goes into electrolyzer is 100% renewables, or you have pink hydrogen, if you use nuclear as an electricity source, or you have yellow hydrogen, if you kind of take the electricity just from the network and you have the mix which is in the network. And what's currently lacking is a clear view which of the hydrogen is allowed and what is clean hydrogen. So there are initial debates around that, and the European taxonomy rules, they say we account hydrogen which is at least 60% cleaner than hydrogen from steam reforming as being sustainable, and that would be a maximum of 4.3 ton of CO2 emissions per ton of hydrogen. But this is still evolving debate, and this is obviously something which is very, very important, because it determines which sources of hydrogen can we use, how many will be there in the next 10 or 20 years, and what does it cost. And one of the big debate is currently how do we set this and which of them do we allow? And each member states have different views which hydrogen should be sustainable or not. But this is a big regulatory issue we face, which we need to solve soon, so that we really meet our targets for the hydrogen economy. If you now look at the long run and the big picture again, the European Union and member states are quite sure that hydrogen will play a very large role. So there are various studies and analysis around. Here's one from where we cite Gaitau study, which came out recently. So in Europe, we assume something like between 2,000 and 3,000 terawatt hours of hydrogen being used by 2050. A lot of that will be used in the industry sector, for example, for green steel, for refineries, for ammonia production, for chemical industry. In transport is a big topic, heavy duty transport, railways, shipping, electricity sector as backup power. And a big debate is currently happening whether it's also used in building sector for heating. And depending where you are, it can be another 150 to 600 terawatt hours of hydrogen to heat the building stock. So there's a big demand. This is quite clear. The question is a bit, where does the hydrogen come from? If you just look at the renewable energy potentials, Europe could provide the renewable energy for its hydrogen by itself. But the problem is we are a densely populated area, and realistically, with network constraint and all the issues, we wouldn't be able to do that. So if you just look at the numbers, that would mean we would kind of install 10 to 15 times the amount of renewables which we have in electricity, which we have in Europe today. So this is really, really challenging to do that. So this means we have to look into a global market and also into imports. A big question if imports is obviously around costs. Don't have time to go into all the details here. Costs are driven by the regulation. So which hydrogen do I allow? Do I have to pay network fees? Do I have to have new renewables, or can I use old renewables? So a lot of hot-heated and hot-hearted debate is ongoing currently in Europe. But people assume that green hydrogen might end up with about €2 per kilogram, maybe 1 in very super sites with lots of wind and sun. excluding transport costs. And blue hydrogen will be cheaper in the next year, and then it depends on the methane slip and the CO2 price, whether it will be cheaper or not. So, but we can assume something around, let's say, €2 per kilogram of hydrogen as a reasonable price on the long run for Europe that can be brought, for hydrogen that can be brought to Europe. And if we look at the power system in Europe, it becomes quite obvious that we also have a challenge in the power system where hydrogen can help. So if you look at the renewable installation numbers, which the European Commission publishes for 2050, we see that about 2/3 of the European power production comes from volatile generation, photovoltaics, onshore wind and offshore wind in particular. And that means we will have more than 2,300 gigawatts of installed of these volatile generation capacities. And that means we need storage because the wind shines, the wind blows when it wants, the sun shines when it wants, and we need to be able to charge our cars and run our heat pumps regardless of the weather. So that's an important thing. So we need infrastructure and particular storage. And storage is obviously pumped hydro storage is an option in Europe, but it's limited in expansion potential. Batteries are an option. You see that the European Commission anticipates about 100 gigawatts of batteries to be installed. But a large share of the storage will also happen through green gases and in particular through hydrogen, especially when we have to move photovoltaic power generation from summer to the night or to winter. So here, the hydrogen will play a big role, not just as an end fuel to decarbonize the industry and the transport sector and maybe the heating sector, but also to help the power sector with the storage challenge. And I said, we have already a big challenge in the power system and hydrogen plays a role, but we believe also in global markets. So there are many countries in the world who already have their own hydrogen strategy. And for example, countries like Norway and other countries which have gas, they are looking into blue hydrogen as export potential or their gas and then making it blue hydrogen in Europe. And there are also countries with very good sun and solar and wind conditions, like in Latin America or in Australia, who explicitly want to export hydrogen as the kind of the new fuel in the future. And there are a lot of projects ongoing in the world. Again, people say on the medium to long run, we expect hydrogen production costs about €1 to €2 per kilogram, which is 3 to 7 cents per kilowatt hour, plus then the costs to bring the stuff to Europe. And in the domestic market, Europe, like Germany, it has maybe production costs between 9 and 11 cents per kilowatt hour. So there is a lot of room between the domestic production costs in Germany, for example, and costs in better countries like in Spain or in MENA or in other countries where you can then make cheaper hydrogen and then bring it to countries in Northern Europe. But as said, so this is not just a long-term view. Also, the governments are investing heavily or supporting heavily into projects. And this is a map just in Germany, which shows you that Germany is currently spending 8 billion euros of support money into projects of hydrogen in Germany. And it covers all sectors. It covers the industry sector, it covers the transport sector, it covers the infrastructure, and it also covers the generation of hydrogen. So there is a lot of happening in Germany, a lot of investment happening currently in Germany already on short notice, but also on the European level, a lot of projects of common European interest are currently promoted and will contribute to the 40 gigawatts targets, which I have showed before. Yeah, this is the situation in Europe. So a big market evolving, chances for blue and green hydrogen are coming. And now very briefly, a few thoughts on the situation in Israel from a kind of European perspective, but knowing the situation in Israel. First, maybe going to the power sector. As you know, the power sector in Israel is currently ongoing the sector reform. So the IEC, the Israel Electric Corporation, is selling some of their plants to the independent power producers, and this already changes the structure of the sector and the reform, and a reform is ongoing of market rules. And part of the plan is not just changing the ownership and the structure, but what we also learned is that the ministry has also raised its ambition, like similar like the European Commission. The Ministry of Energy has raised the ambitions in the last years in order to become a cleaner, or to get a cleaner power system. And here we see at least 3 challenges in the situation in Israel where hydrogen can play a role. So the first part is that Israel expects a strong demand increase in electricity because of the population development, GDP growth, and so on. And this is something that we see that despite the energy efficiency challenges or efforts, there are forecasts that the power demand will grow from a little bit above 70 terawatt hours per year today to about 100 terawatt hours by 2030. So new electricity sources need to be found. At the same time, we want to have the coal phase out, which currently is almost 20% of the current generation. So we don't have to just face the new increase in power demand. We also have to replace the coal phase out. And the demand in Israel, because of the cooling, is relatively volatile. And in the long run, we will have a lot of photovoltaics in Israel. So almost 30% of the electricity will come from solar power, and solar power is also in Israel volatile, which means we have a similar storage challenge as I just showed for European example. And then there is one specialty in Israel. Israel power system is a power island. So you might know in Germany or in Europe, we have a European power network. So each country can help to balance out the neighboring countries. So if the sun is shining in France and not in Germany, then the power can be flowing. Or if the wind is blowing in Germany, but no sun in France, we can do it the other way around. Israel power system is not connected to its neighbors. So the security of supply and all the demand and supply balances have to be balanced out by the country itself. And this is, from our perspective, a challenge. And this also has implications for the future role of hydrogen. So first of all, if we wanted to produce green hydrogen in Israel, that would mean we need electricity and green electricity. But as seen before, we already need the green electricity for the own purpose, for covering demand or for replacing the coal. So this is very complicated if we add additional electricity demand for domestic green hydrogen production on top. On the other hand, we have gas resources in Israel, and we also have a similar problem, as I said before, in Europe. If we have, for example, electric cars or AC, like cooling, and the sun is not shining, we still need electricity. So that means we need a source of green fuel, which we can use to run the backup power plants. So we have now power plants which are on coal, which will be replaced by gas. And on the very long run, even the gas will be too dirty. So then maybe blue hydrogen will be an option to fire the power plants in the very long run. So hydrogen will be a backup option for the power system. And what we also will see, I guess, in a couple of years, not now in 5 or 10 years, but 2030 plus, there will be hours if we have a lot of solar, but not so much demand, that we have too much electricity. So there will be surplus electricity where we need to find something to do with. So that can be batteries or it can be hydrogen storage. So here, green hydrogen can help us in the very long run to deal with surplus electricity. And maybe very briefly at the end, a view on the gas sector. Israel is lucky enough to have a lot of gas resources with the Tamar, Leviathan, Tani, and Karish field. In total, we have about 30 to 35 BCM per year as production. And this is enough to run about 20 gigawatts of power plant in terms of capacity. I mean, in terms of the BCMs, it's more than enough for the power sector and more than enough to go into export. But another thing to look at is the capacity, because if you use the gas to support the power system if there's no sun in future, then you also have to have not enough gas. You have to have the capacity to get the gas out of the fields and through the pipelines into the power plant. So there are two constraints. Do we have enough gas in terawatt hours? Yes, we have. Second question, do we have enough network and infrastructure capacity in gigawatts to feed the situations when we need it? So these are two different questions. The first one is quite easy. The second one is still easy, but we have to have a look at that in 2030 plus. And as you know, coal phase out means we need gas in the domestic power sector. And here, this is a projection by IEC. So IEC expect that the demand for gas from the power market will go up by roughly 50%. That means about 12 BCM out of the 30 roughly go to the power sector. Then you also will know that Israel has signed some export contracts with Jordan and Egypt. That's another 7 BCM per year if these contracts are happening, which go out. And then we have, coming back to Europe, the EastMed pipeline, which is planned, firstly with 10 BCM capacity a year, but possibly being expanded to 20 BCM per year. And very briefly, this is the project which is under debate. Decision expected end of 22, delivery start, if everything goes fine, by 25, costs about $7 billion. And it goes from Israel via Cyprus to Greece and Italy. So here again, this is then an option to make use of the valuable gas. And even in a world where Europe goes to a very, very clean energy system, we can still make use of the gas from a European perspective. And there are, in theory, 4 options how this could happen. So basically, the decision to make is you can do the steam methane reforming in Israel and then doing, let's say, a pyrolysis or CCU in the Negev salt aquifers. And then you put the hydrogen through the pipeline, or you put the hydrogen on a ship. Or the second option is you just export the gas to Europe, and then the conversion into hydrogen happens in Europe. Again, either, for example, in Greece or Italy with steam reforming, or you put LNG ship to some of the European harbors and then make the hydrogen conversion there. So these 4 options are there. I think the option hydrogen per ship is the most expensive one. It's the not very likely one. The other 3 options are in theory meaningful and can be done. Obviously, it's then a question of the cost and the contract which you can get in Europe if you are aiming to do that. So what does it mean for the hydrogen role of hydrogen in Israel's gas sector? We still see a very good role in Israel for hydrogen, especially as we said before, the green hydrogen is difficult in Israel, but we have gas. And that means blue hydrogen is a good option. We can use the domestic gas resource in the next years anyway as the bridging technology to substitute the coal. But even when we talk 2040 or more, where we are in really clean worlds, where the gas becomes too dirty, with the help of turquoise or blue hydrogen, we can still make use of the gas fields. And as said before, hydrogen is a good way to defossilize and make a clean domestic industry in Israel, but also in transport, a valuable option. As mentioned before, hydrogen will be definitely a very important part for backing up the power system, which consists then in the very long run of a lot of photovoltaics. And we need, in addition, security of supply, and that only comes from guaranteed capacity. So we need some power sources with the storage behind it where we can push the button if we need the electricity, and we can't just rely on wind or photovoltaics. And here, apart from batteries, hydrogen will have a very crucial role. Yeah, that was my presentation from a European angle. I hope it was interesting, and maybe also some ideas for Israel are worth to discuss. Here are my contact data. Yossi and Eric also know my contacts. So if you have questions, feel free to contact us. Thank you very much for your attention.
טוב, Dr. Christopher, thank you very much. It was very interesting. Hope to see you soon in Israel.
Yeah, thank you. I hope too. Huh? Have a good conference. Huh? Thank you, everybody.
Very much.